This is a 3x3 Rubik's Cube, and this is also a 3x3 Rubik's Cube. You've probably heard this fact before, that a 2x2 and a 3x3 actually have the same mechanism inside. The reason for this is simple. It's much easier to design the mechanism for a puzzle with an odd number of layers because of the symmetry that you get from having middle layers. So rather than come up with some strange complicated design for an even layered puzzle, it's easier to just borrow the mechanism from a 3x3 and then hide that extra layer underneath the rest of the pieces. And so that's where I got an idea. If there really is a full-blown 3x3 inside of this puzzle, then we should be able to do some modifications to uncover it. So that's my goal for this video. Start with a fully functional 2x2 speed cube and see if we can't turn it into a 3x3 speed cube. Now the puzzle that I'm going to be using for this experiment was actually a long-standing main of mine, the Valk 2M. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. For one thing, I actually have two identical copies of this puzzle, so I'm not going to miss modifying one of them too much. Another reason is that this puzzle is kind of dirty inside, and so this gives me an excuse to clean it. But the two most important reasons have to do with the internal edge pieces on this cube. If you've ever taken apart a 2x2, you'll know that there's always one corner piece that seems to be harder to get out than all the rest of them. It's basically locked in place relative to the core using some clever bits of extra plastic on the edges or sometimes the centers. And the reason for that is that if you took a totally unmodified 3x3 mechanism and turned it into a 2x2 so you can only touch these outer 8 corner pieces, eventually you'd get stuck in a state like this where the middle layer gets out of alignment and there'd be no way to fix it because it's hidden underneath the rest of the pieces. And so to prevent that middle layer from getting misaligned, what you do is take one corner piece and basically glue it to the 3 nearby center pieces so that no matter how you turn the cube, that middle layer will always stay aligned. And so that's what these weird little notches are for that you'll find on just 3 of the edge pieces of this 2x2. You can see they fit into these little holes on the center pieces, which holds this corner piece into place no matter what turns you do on the cube. And so you can imagine, if we want to turn this mechanism back into a normal 3x3, which we do, we have to get rid of this crazy internal bandaging, and the great thing about the Valk 2 is that that's as easy as just removing these 2 little notches. That's all we need to do to restore the functionality that we need, unlike some other 2x2s which actually have totally custom pieces for this part of the cube, which wouldn't really work. So that was the third reason for choosing this cube. The fourth and final reason is that the way this cube handles magnetization is actually pretty unique. A lot of 2x2s don't have any magnets in their internal edges. Instead, the corners attract directly to the other corners. You can see there's 2 magnets right there that attract to those 2 magnets right there, just like that. But in this 2x2, the magnets work exactly the same way that they do in a 3x3. You can see there's magnets in the edges and in the corners, and so they're basically magnetizing the internal 3x3 rather than the external 2x2 facade. And so that's great for us because it means that our brand new 3x3 will come pre-magnetized. The magnets work exactly the same as they did in the original 2x2, and we won't have to remove them along the way like we would in some other 2x2s. So I think a good first step will be to shrink these corner pieces down as much as possible so they're not covering everything up. And I think we can do that by basically just cutting off all this excess down to just the base mechanism of the corner piece. We can make this a little easier on ourselves by unscrewing this little screw and then popping off the big cap that has the actual stickerless pieces. And there we go. We've already removed most of the plastic. So I'm just going to do the first major step of cutting down all these corners and of course modifying the locking edges. And then we can see what the cube looks like and see where we need to go from there. Ta-da! This is what the 3x3 looks like that's hiding inside of all your 2x2s. Hopefully this makes what I was saying earlier a lot more obvious. You have the 8 corners on the outside that you can see with all the edges and centers in between. And after exposing all the pieces and removing those little notches from the edges, you can see that it is in fact fully functional just like a 3x3. You might have seen that that process took a lot more super glue than I expected. Turns out those screws in the bottom of the corners were holding a lot of things together, including the stock of the corner piece and the magnets. But after gluing all those back into place, it's working perfectly. I even had a chance to clean out all the gross old lube. But now, how do we go from this strange looking ball thing to something that looks more like a 3x3 that we can actually put stickers on? I considered trying to fill in all these holes for a nice smooth consistent surface and just putting stickers straight on top of the sphere, but I think for the full 2x2 to 3x3 experience, we gotta make it a cube. And so you probably know where this is going. What I'm gonna do is measure all the pieces and then carefully design a set of cubic caps that I can 3D print and stick right on top of here to turn it into a cube. So the flat center caps will probably have to fit into these 4 holes somehow. The edges and the centers stickers we'll just have to glue on to these weird spherical shapes. The geometry will certainly be a little bit complicated, but I think with some trial and error I can figure it out. And then once I've got all those glued on, I found this ancient set of 4x4 stickers that I think will be the perfect size for the pieces of this thing. I think it's from an old Moyu 4x4. These sticker shades definitely date it though. Anyway, let's go ahead and get 3D printing, stickering, and gluing, and then hopefully we'll end up with one of the most unique 3x3 speed cubes out there. And that whole process was actually surprisingly painless. Turns out having a good plan and a good design actually makes things pretty easy in the end. I was a little bit worried about especially the corners not sticking very well because of the limited surface area with that super glue, but it turned out using just the right amount and then being really patient holding it there in place for about 30 seconds actually formed a really good bond. I'm super happy with how the 3 different types of pieces fit together so cohesively. The surfaces are all super flat, there's no obvious gaps or overlaps. The one problem that I did have was specifically with putting on the orange stickers. These guys just do not want to stick into place, and as if to prove my point, the one edge sticker that I have not yet glued down just came off, so let me get that fixed real quick. There we go. I don't know what it is about this color specifically. I didn't have any problems with any of the other stickers, but I think we can all agree that orange is objectively the worst color on a Rubik's Cube. Anyway, I know you guys all want to know how well this thing turns, and the answer is actually pretty darn well. It comes from one of the best 2x2 speed cubes of the last 5 years or so, and it turns out you have to have a pretty good 3x3 speed cube inside to make a good 2x2 speed cube outside. You can definitely really hear that 3D printed texture to the pieces, but that'll go away with some time, and if you ignore that, it's just a really nice, smooth, snappy, responsive speed cube. The snappiness from the magnets is really nice. It has really good corner cutting like you'd expect from a 2x2. Overall, just a really solid little 3x3. And when I say little, it really is. This thing ended up being actually a little bit smaller than the 2x2 it was made out of. It goes to show just how tiny the 3x3 is that's fit inside every 2x2. I actually made it a little bit disproportional to make it bigger. You can see the center pieces are a little bit smaller than the edges and corners, so if not for that, it would have been even smaller. One more fun thing I want to do before trying out a full solve is just taking a look at the new glued together pieces. I actually haven't done this yet, but let's see what it looks like on the inside. And that is actually a lot cooler than I thought. It just looks like some crazy person designed a 3x3 and made the outer black caps just be super weird shapes. I just wasn't expecting everything to look so much like a normal 3x3 because of the crazy process we took to get here. In fact, just take a look at these edge and corner pieces compared to the pieces of the original Volk 3 that this 2x2 was based on. They look shockingly similar, especially these edge pieces. Okay, this has been a lot of fun, but as always, we gotta finish things off with a full solve. So let's go ahead and get this cube scrambled up. And there we go. So let's go ahead and do some inspection here. And then we can begin in 3, 2, 1, and go. So other than this cube being a little bit too small to fit in my hands, it kind of feels the same size as like that mini Z-Long. It pretty much is just like a normal 3x3 to solve. It is kind of reminiscent of that original Volk that I was just showing you. I think I'll just keep calling it the Volk 2M, which is technically correct, although very confusing because it is a 3x3. Definitely the most unique 3x3 speed cube that I own. But I hope you all enjoyed this ridiculous journey from one size of speed cube to another. Hopefully you learned a little bit about how 2x2 works along the way. Definitely let me know down in the comments your other crazy ideas for things like this to make. But that's pretty much it, and I'll see you guys next time.